the author of the newly released book titled Ashley, The Untold Story of the Women of January 6th. And I'm very, very excited about interviewing about this particular book because I believe January 6th has a great part to play in how we look at a coming Kamala's America, if you will. The book thoroughly walks us through the trials that Air Force veteran Ashley Babbitt has faced and what so many, her family, and what so many other women had to endure since January 6th. Jack's the author of 12 books and has appeared on C-SPAN's Book TV a dozen times. Amazing. He has produced documentaries for regional PBS and national cable channels. He currently serves as the executive director of Ingram Magazine, and he's regularly writes for American Thinker, American Spectator, and our very own WorldNet Daily, the best of all the bunch. So he joins me now. Jack, it's so good to have you with us. And I just would like to start off by asking you to just jump into this book with why you wrote it, why this book at this time.
Well, Elizabeth, and by the way, a word about you and WND. You guys gave me my breakthrough in online writing. I started writing a weekly column at WND at least 20 years ago.
Amazing.
Every Thursday. I don't think I've missed two columns in 20 years. So I appreciate that opportunity.
Well, you're welcome. We thank you, by the way.
Here's what's weird. I woke up one morning in October, which is pretty late in this process, and with the word Ashley on my mind, ASHLI. And I said, why hasn't anyone written a book about this, right? And then providentially, my agent, Alex Hoyt, calls me that same day. He said, Jack, you got any book ideas? I said, yeah. He's like, I got this, yeah. And normally this process takes, he and I bat it around. We do a proposal, send the proposal to the publisher. But in this case, he said, that great idea. And then he said, let me call our publisher, Anthony Zaccardi at Post Hill. And then within 48 hours, we had to go, which is unheard of in this business, as you know.
Yes.
And so I set out to tell the story. Now, I knew that to tell the story of Ashley, since she was killed on January 6th, was 35 years old. And, she was not like a major diarist or someone who tweeted extensively. I needed to flesh out her perspective by adding the perspective of other women who made the same decision she did, that is to go to Washington on January 6th. So I ended up almost randomly choosing 10 women. I knew two of them I would choose because they're both killed that day. That is Ashley and Roseanne Boylan. The other 8 were just because they were different, interesting, quirky. And I just got email confirmation 2 days ago from the last one not to be imprisoned, Farah Carpenter, an NYPD former medically retired officer. And I got an email from the Bureau of Corrections saying, Sarah would like you to be on her email list, right? So it's 8 of them, the 8 who survived are all in prison or have been incarcerated since this happened. My great-grandmother just got her ankle bracelet last week. So they run the gamut. Of the 8 women, the most real crime any of them committed, there's 10 women, none of them committed any crimes to speak of. One woman broke a window. She's a mother of 8, and she's serving 4.5 years in prison.
Oh, my God.
That's what the Merrick Garland, Biden, Harris Justice Department looks like. With 4 more years of that, we'll be getting arrested, Elizabeth, for doing this show.
Well, I'm not going to give them any ideas because there are reasons that they might want to come after Joseph or me. And I find that very scary because there is one thing, I'm not going to actually mention it, that I almost brought up online, doing an interview, doing a video. And I thought, I'm not going to say what I was just about to say. It wouldn't make any difference in the grand scheme of things. It's not fighting for justice or
Right.
exposing truth or anything. But I literally thought there is no reason. Otherwise, I would just make that comment in an offhand way.
Yeah.
But because it has something to do with January 6th, I literally thought, no, you know what? You've got a husband and an 89-year-old mother. Don't tempt fate just to be
Yeah.
flippant and say something online. So I don't think that makes me a coward, but it does
Makes you.
say that America is a
Yeah.
very different place, I would say,
Right.
since
I
since
think that's
President Obama took
good
office.
advice. Yeah. I was, I had yesterday, I mean, what aired yesterday, I should say September 1st, was on Sunday was my debut on C-SPAN's Book TV, which now gives me 13
Oh,
CW.
I misspoke. I apologize.
No, no, you're way late. That's
I'll
all.
get those fact checkers on from now on.
They wouldn't have known because it wasn't 13 until September 1. But one of the women in the audience said, I was there on January 6th, and everyone looks at her like, oh,
Don't say
you know,
those words.
right.
I knew people that were there on January 6th, did not go to the Capitol building, and are on no-fly lists. They literally only checked into a hotel room and came nowhere near the Capitol. They didn't go after them to charge them with any crime, but they're on a no-fly list nonetheless.
Right.
So
The ellipse, and you know the geography of Washington better than most people, the ellipse where Trump spoke is 45 minutes from the Capitol. And that factors into this whole story because the charging documents by Jack Smith, I'm just jumping ahead a little, and the House committee report were all based on the assumption that when Trump said, we got to go fight like hell at the very end of his speech, that incited the crowd to attack the Capitol. Well, the attack on the Capitol started 20 minutes before that, 45 minutes away. In other words, the people who went to Trump's speech didn't get at the Capitol until after 2 o'clock. The breach of the Capitol started just before 1 o'clock. They were just,
when you say breach, do you mean where people were walking in just as tourists, through the velvet ropes, or someone actually had done something that would be considered at least a misdemeanor, like breaking a window?
yeah, I would say that when I want to use the word breach, there's a couple levels of it, but Ray Epps is at every phase of it. The initial breach of the perimeter began at 12:53 when his crew, which had been marshaling down Pennsylvania Avenue towards the Capitol, they pushed over these bicycle racks and just walked, the lightly guarded, I was pathetically defended perimeter. And then they started walking towards the Capitol. He's at the forefront of that. The night before, of course, he was saying, we've got to go into the Capitol. So by 1:06 p.m., there's a large, but still, a little rowdy, but peaceful crowd mustered in front of the west side of the Capitol. And at 1:06 p.m., the inexperienced and untrained and panicky Capitol Police start launching munitions into the crowd, in the middle of the crowd. Usually you launch tear gas and that sort of thing in front of the crowd to push the crowd back, but these people have nowhere to go. That's at 1:06 p.m. It's only 5 minutes later, 45 minutes away, that Trump says, we got to fight like hell. And yet that was both in the Jack Smith indictment and in the January 6th committee report. I'm reading it saying, the timeline. How can you possibly be saying something this easily refuted? Well, I wrote about this after the first Jack Smith indictment came out. And then last week when he came out with a new one, he took out the notation that Trump incited this protest. Because, I don't know that others must have called him out on that as well. But they're just making this stuff up. And women got in the middle of
So
it.
do you think he removed that language or that connection because the cover was blown? Somebody had
Yes.
actually typed up or took a napkin and piece of
Right.
copy paper and drew a line there and said, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock.
45
And
minutes away, right?
yeah, any investigator,
Right,
anyone who's doing an historical analysis, anything that is takes place in time, which most things do, but there's a timeline. And once you start laying those items out at the time on the timeline, things become very clear, especially contradictions like the one you're speaking of.
right. And as a case in point, and to answer your question a little more fully, Ashley Babbitt stayed until the end of the Trump speech, and she left at the end. And I should say Trump started an hour late. I think the conspirators were planning on him. Had he started at 11 o'clock, his people would have arrived just at 1 o'clock. Thousands more people would have arrived. But Ashley Babbitt doesn't come within sight of the Capitol until 2, like the other people stay to the end. And she enters the building, and we know her timeline pretty well. She enters the building at 2:23 through a broken window. So the doors had already been opened by that time. So by 2:23 p.m., there are probably a half dozen doors or windows open, and people are wandering now. And like the others, Ashley honors the the rope lines, right? I mean, here are insurrectionists. When do insurrectionists honor rope lines? When they walk to the Capitol. Well, I'll just explain what happened to her first. So she gets there. She's a very independent soul. She came by herself. Her husband had to stay behind to man their pool business in San Diego. She doesn't have any children. She's 35 years old, attractive, small, maybe 110 pounds, 5'2", which matters for a lot of these women because they got caught in these crowds that they couldn't.
You get pushed forward.
Yeah, right. There's nothing they could do. Even if you're a full-size male, you get caught in a crowd like this, like at these soccer games and stuff. You're just part of that crowd. But she avoids the crowd. She avoids this crowd in front of the doors to the House floor, where these protesters are joining with only five congressmen stayed behind. All Republicans, all men, 4 of them from Texas, right? And the other from Oklahoma. They knew these people. They weren't afraid of them, right? The Capitol Police were afraid of them, some of them. The Democrats were frightened. I mean, they were hysterical about actually having come to face with a whole,
Americans coming into the Capitol building.
honestly, on a weekday. And so then she walked off by herself. Ashley did, walks down a long corridor. She's being trailed by a citizen journalist, a guy named Taylor Hanson, who's taking video of this. And then she reaches a set of doors that protect the speaker's lobby, which leads into the House floor. And there's barricades behind the speaker's lobby, the door, and there's 3 policemen standing in front of it. And Ashley Babbitt had served 14 years in the Air Force in the military police capacity. And so she starts, just talking to him, laughing and telling jokes. Taylor Hanson offers him some water. And then this crowd begins to surge behind her. And there's some bad actors in this crowd. Some of them are provocateurs. We know that, not Trump people. There's probably a few bad actors who were Trump people. And they were there too. And then now they're crowding into this area. And the police are standing
Very
there.
confined.
Totally, yeah. It's a narrow corridor. And then there's one guy named Zachary Lamb, a guy with several priors, no known connection to MAGA or Trump, starts punching the windows right between the cops. The cops are facing out, and he's punching the windows, cracking them, not breaking them. And then all of a sudden, the 3 police officers walk away. Ashley's been yelling at them, do your job, call for backup, do something, right? Don't let this guy do this. And then instead they just walk away.
Why did they walk away, Jack?
Well, there's been various arguments made, but there was a tactical unit coming up the stairs. But instead of waiting for the tactical unit to get there, I think they panicked and they just walked away. Partly because they don't know, Trump people, I know Trump people. We know what they're not going to do, right? Mm-hmm. They're not going to, punch you in the face but this guy starts just punching the windows. Most of the people are saying, back to blue and hey, stop this crap. So then when they leave, a lamb takes a helmet from another protester and now starts breaking the windows out. And at that point, Ashley, you could see she was getting frustrated. And When a lamb is now breaking the windows, she grabs his backpack, she pulls him around, and she's a left-hander, and she just punches him in the face, and his glasses go flying off. And then I think she just decided, then we hear, and it's split-second timing, there's a gun, right? We hear this. Some of the protesters are yelling this. Ashley doesn't see this gun. I think she thinks the gun's on her side of the doors, and she jumps into the window frame. I think she just wanted to escape the crowd. What we know she's not doing is leading an insurrection. We know that. And soon as she jumps into the crowd, without warning, without stop or I'll shoot, without halt there, there's other Lieutenant Michael Byrd, now Captain Michael Byrd, takes one shot, bam, shoots and kills her, right?
I looked at that video over and over and over again. I could not believe seeing that gun. And then what? He's gone. He doesn't do anything that you would normally expect a police officer to do with a shooting. Right.
Oh, he panics. He makes this stupid call that I talk about in the book. He calls, shots are being fired at us here at the Capitol, blah, blah, blah. No, Mac, only one shot was fired that day, and you fired it, right?
And he really thought he was going to get away with that, perhaps. I mean, I'm thinking for him, but if this were, a script, the guy shouting something like this because he's instantly realizing, I just murdered somebody. I did not warn her that I was going to shoot. I didn't warn her to halt. I just shot this woman, and she's probably dead. That was a pretty close shot. Yeah. And what does he do? Immediately moves into cover your rear end mode. Absolutely. Shots are being fired. But he didn't realize perhaps that enough cameras and enough recording would come out of this that he couldn't cover his tracks. Am I right about that? Or
that's exactly right. It was the only bullet fired that day. I will say this on Michael Byrd's behalf, and it's a very humble, not a compliment, it's just a reality. There was a plot that day to incite this riot and to provoke and to shut down the certification process. It wasn't led by Trump or his people. But Michael Byrd wasn't part of that plot. What he did set the cause of the conspirators back, right? He had created a martyr. And he created a martyr who was the last person you'd want to be as a martyr. Attractive, Air Force veteran, married.
5 foot tall.
Yeah, right.
Pretty girl.
Right. With 8 deployments overseas in countries that no one would ever go as a tourist, and so what they did in reaction to that, it was I would say the ugliest part of this whole process. And so at the end of the day, on January 6th, one of my women I profile, Sarah Carpenter, I mentioned her earlier, NYPD retired. She just came down for the day on a whim. She's driving back, and she calls a friend who lives off the highway in Maryland and thinks about stopping by and says, hey, just come back from Capitol, blah, blah, blah. And the woman says, you were at the Capitol? And Sarah said, yeah. She goes, you killed someone, and a friend says, your Trump people killed a Capitol police officer with a fire extinguisher. This is on the evening of January 6th. Sarah is crestfallen. She's horrified. She's a cop. She didn't want to be involved in a lethal, action like this. And she can't sleep tonight. She can't get out of bed the next day. She's so horrified, so upset. So we know when this happened. This call took place on the evening of January 6th. Officer Brian Sicknick was alive and well at the end of the day on January 6th. On January 7th, unrelated to anything that happened on January 6th, Brian Sicknick suffered a series of strokes and died, natural causes, as the autopsy would reveal, as organic. Whoa. Then, and here's the most ghoulish hoax in American political history. 2 law enforcement officials, these are the people, according to the New York Times, who are their sources, tell the New York Times that Pro-Trump protesters, quote, hit Brian Sicknick over the head with a fire extinguisher. And then they add this ghastly detail just to show you this was not a miscommunication. They say that Sicknick was rushed out of the Capitol with blood flowing from a huge gash in his head. This was made the print edition of the January 8th New York Times. I have a copy. I've seen it. They can't walk that one back. They could fudge on the online editions, but that's what the world was told on the morning of January 8th. And that totally changed the narrative around January 6th. Up until that point, some people say it was like a big panty raid, things got out of control, blah, blah, blah.
That one I never heard. It's like a big panty raid.
I can attribute that to someone. One of my favorites, Jason Whitlock, said that. But, you couldn't, after someone was killed. Now, no one cared that 4 Trump protesters were killed that day. That wasn't an issue. 3 of them were killed by police action. One of them died of essentially of natural causes on the scene. But now we had a martyr. And to make it enshrine his martyrdom, they put Brian Sicknick's ashes in the rotunda of the Capitol. This is what they did for Ruth Bader Ginsburg, right? And then they bury him with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. Meanwhile, although she was a 14-year veteran, Ashley Babbitt is denied any kind of military honors at her burial. She's cremated and her ashes thrown into the sea. Of course, Brian Sicknick was cremated quickly, as they do in these cases. And then Brooks was cremated in Brooklyn and Pennsylvania before anyone could say boo about it. But they sat on the autopsy reports for Sicknick for more than 100 days. So that for 100 days, there was no contrary narrative. It was all just Capitol Police protesters kill, pro-Trump protesters kill Capitol Police officers. And then over this next year, 4 Capitol Police officers would commit suicide. And rather than trying to figure out what was going on in the Capitol Police, they just kept adding these suicides and calling them January 6th deaths. So you'd have people like Merrick Garland and Biden saying 5 people were killed as either some of them got sloppy and said on January 6th, some just said as a result of January 6th, but prosecutors were feeding that line to juries.
They actually said that to juries.
Yes.
Isn't that some sort of malpractice? I mean,
You couldn't even begin to tell where the malpractice begins and ends.
Well,
But
wait a
here's
minute, Jack, let me do this one thing because firstly, I will say this, that one of the reasons that I'm doing this series, there's several, but one is that the flood of stories, the news cycle, you're experiencing this yourself, just like every single American who at least pays any attention to the news knows that so many extraordinary things are coming at us at a pace, at a clip that is so fast and so overwhelming. It's not like Niagara Falls or that hose, hitting you, fire hose hitting you. It's every day. Niagara Falls. And we can't even get through a weekend without having that fire hose in our face again. I mean, you've got Biden, you've got October 7th, you've got Iran hitting Israel on Sabbath or on Sunday. And so it's so intense. And what I have noticed is that everyone has to become an expert. There's a method to the madness. And one of the methods is you just keep changing the story and hyping certain stories so that the other one, like attempted assassinations, just drop off. In what world would an attempted assassination on the former president and the lead candidate, the opponent of the current president, not stay in the front section or the front page of the newspaper for months on end?
You're absolutely right. And now it's old news. What are we talking about that? Let's move on.
So much happened with January 6th. So much of it was misinformation, disinformation, and carefully orchestrated. And, some are keeping with the narrative. It's a violent insurrection, an insurrection with no weapons, a violent insurrection where everybody forgot to bring their weapons. And you're bringing up some things that I've either forgotten. This is why the book is so important, or I never knew. Like, I don't even remember if I knew that they were adding officer suicides to the so-called casualties of the first fake casualty of January 6th, or, officer casualty. I don't know if I even remember that. So what I want to do is, for the benefit of those who need that refresher, I would like you to go back to the whole concept of January 6th and give the short narrative of what truly the left believes, or those who know the truth cynically push us or the American people into believing. That narrative, and then follow up with, this is what the true narrative of January 6th. Then I want to go deep dive into the contents of your book, some of these women, but then I definitely want us to be focusing on Kamala's America. So start us off with the narratives.
Yeah, but, before I go too far, Elizabeth, on that, I'll start with just what they think. And then I want to get right back to Kamala, because she plays a key role in this. And I don't
Okay,
want it to be
do that.
what they were told, and what half of America still believes, is that this violent mob, angry mob of deplorables came to Washington, armed to the teeth. They were incited by Trump. They stormed the Capitol at Trump's urging. Trump said nothing to prevent them and only encouraged them. And that they killed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Capitol Police officers, right? That's what they think. The truth is utterly contrary to that. I mean, just with the beginning with this, the mob was festive. Everyone I talked to said, we're having the time of our lives. This is a joyful occasion, because they had taken their masks off. They were among people who were like-minded. They were enjoying themselves. They're at the rally.
When you say taking their masks off.
Yeah. They were in a place where no one's asking you to keep your face mask on. This is,
Oh, the face masks. Okay, got it. COVID, forgot.
still locked down, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
9 of the 10 women I profile were day one COVID dissidents, right? Including Ashley Babbitt. She called it the control virus, which was a good word for
That's
it.
good.
And that part of it is what provoked them to come to Washington. None of them came armed. None of them came with insurrection in their mind. That's nuts. I don't know that there were, 50 people in that whole crowd who had insurrection on their mind. That was just not part of the plan.
And how many people were there, Jack?
I've heard conservative estimates of 1 million people. How many people ended up at the Capitol is probably closer to 10,000, maybe. I don't know. Who went in the building, probably not much more than 2,000, I'd guess. But let me jump to the Kamala role, because she plays
Please do.
there's a counter narrative here that needs to be known. And that is, this was an inside job. And there are a couple of major giveaways. One is the figure of Ray Epps. Ray Epps is this large guy in a MAGA hat, tactical vest. Everyone's seen him who's watched the videos. January 5th, the nights before, he's urging people to go into the Capitol, right? And the Trump supporters are around him saying,
Where was he when he was encouraging people? Was it online or?
He was in the streets of Washington, outside.
It was in the streets.
Yeah, near the Capitol, but not, on the grounds.
So he's walking around to strangers,
Yeah,
and striking up conversations and encouraging them, trying to apparently incite them to
into the Capitol,
Right.
not go the Capitol, but we have to go into the Capitol. He's very specific about this. And on the night of the 5th, the Trump people were saying, Fed, 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 because they think he's a plant. He's so obvious. On January 6th, while Trump is speaking back at the Ellipse, videos pick him up, leading with the Metropolitan Police called an ad hoc group of people down Pennsylvania Avenue to the perimeter of the Capitol grounds where the bike racks are set up. At 12:53, he whispers in the ear of this one other protester, who is an ex-con also, and then they start pushing over the bicycle racks, and that launches the other group does the same couple, 100 yards away or whatever. That basically begins the insurrection or the riot. That's it. All this is happening just about 1 o'clock. At 1 o'clock on the Capitol grounds, a gentleman mounts the mock gallows he and his pals had constructed, puts up the crossbeam and the noose at 1 o'clock. This guy is fully visible facially,
But they didn't find him, did they?
I haven't found him yet. Just after 1 o'clock, this guy mounts the scaffolding, which has been set up for the media for the inauguration, with like an electric bullhorn, and starts urging people on. Fully facially visible, still not identified, right? At 1 o'clock, bombs which are allegedly planted the night before were found first near the RNC, not really at the RNC, and then at the DNC, right? At 1 o'clock. This is all happening at 1 o'clock. The bomber, $500,000 reward, still not identified. Ray Epps was just too visible. He first goes up on the FBI most wanted list, then he gets yanked down. And then
So he was on the FBI most wanted list?
For about 15 minutes, and then
Does anybody have a screenshot of that?
Oh yeah. And then he was taken down, right? Because they got the word, hey, he's one of us. He's our guy. And so even though he was there at the first breach, he was there at the second breach, he had hands-on role in pushing this huge metal sign into a line of cops. And he texts his nephew that he had orchestrated the events, right? He goes unpunished for 3 years until finally the noise around him becomes such that they finally have to kind of arrest him. He pleads. They give him 1 year probation. My great-grandmother, who drove by herself from Colorado Springs, walks into the Capitol through an open door, prays for 10 minutes, comes out. Yeah.
Prays for 10 minutes.
Right. She's the prayerful grandma. She gets a stiffer sentence than Ray Epps, right? She's under house arrest right now, $100,000 fine. Ray Epps is just walking the streets. Ray Epps was one of many people who were there doing what Ray Epps did. He was just too visible and too obvious, but they still let him off. The pipe bombs are interesting, and that's where the flashpoint is right now for future revelations. I think that two people screwed up the plans that day. One was Donald Trump by starting an hour late. Had he started on time, all his people would have arrived just at the witching hour, 1 o'clock. The other person who screws up the plans is Kamala Harris. Because, and this is as I interpret the events, she's at the DNC that morning, right? I don't think
where the pipe bomb was,
right.
The pipe bomb was found.
I don't think the people who orchestrated that plot knew she was going to be there, because that also meant the Secret Service was going to be there. That also meant that they'd have done sweeps with bomb-sniffing dogs, right? So the whole idea that these bombs had been planted the night before is beginning to fall apart already.
Because are you saying that those so-called bombs really were not bombs that, because if dogs had done the sweeping that morning, anytime before the vice president arrived, or Kamala Harris arrived, yeah, then they would have found the bombs.
That's right. Also, the bombs had 1 hour kitchen timers on them, right?
I saw those pictures.
Yeah, and so if they were set the night before, as the FBI insisted, $500,000 reward, nationwide manhunt. Uh, how can you set them at 8 p.m. and have them within a 1 hour kitchen timer? They were a prop. They were a prop designed to incite, maybe to pull the Capitol Police off, which it did, and to further incite riot and to make it easier for the riot to take place. Here's how we know they were planted by their side, their allies. On January 17th, Kamala Harris gives an interview, January 17, 2021. I just found this. She gives an interview with Jane Pauley. I think it's on CBS Good Morning. And Jane Pauley asks her, oh, what must have been like? What was your day like? Blah, 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 blah. So Kamala Harris answers, and this is predictive of what would happen for the next year. She goes, I was at the Capitol that morning, and then I was at a meeting, and then, and she's being very careful about this, and then the Secret Service came and they evacuated my husband and me and took us to a secure location. Well, that's all true, except for the fact that the meeting wasn't at the Capitol. The meeting was at the DNC, right? So she's already been instructed to bury that detail, that she was at the DNC that morning.
You said this was in 2021 that she was giving this?
January 17th, right? Even before Biden's inaugurated, they have a line, they're going to stick to it. For the next year, Kamala Harris allows this lie to fester. And it has real world consequences because the prosecutors in the J6 cases, and there's hundreds of them that first year, are telling juries and judges that Kamala Harris was within 20 feet. I'm sorry, no, they're not telling them that. They're telling them that Kamala Harris was at the Capitol during the riot. And that made, and since she was a protectee of the Secret Service, that made her presence there a restricted space. That allowed the judges and the prosecutors to ratchet up the charges on all of these J6ers, right?
Because the vice president was in the building.
During the riot.
During the riot. So and all of these elements, excuse me, because you can keep your storyline. For me, this is harder to follow. So there's so many different elements. We've got Ray Epps, of course, right, who is an apparatchik. He's some kind of, I don't know what you call his role, but he's a mole. He's doing his thing. You've got a bomb. That's pretty big stuff. And you've also got that hangman's noose thing built somewhere that no one still has been able to find. So that's sort of the noose is implying that there's this deep-seated violence between the hangman's noose, between the bomb, the vice presidents in the Capitol, Donald Trump saying fight, not fight, fight, fight. Sorry, that was wrong year.
It's something quite like that. You got to go fight like hell.
Yeah, fight like hell, which, by the way, people say all the time, and Democrats have said it probably 10 times more than Republicans. But he also said peacefully and patriotically.
That was cut out of every place, including Jack Smith cut it out, and the House committee cut it out of their final statements.
So they've actually planned these elements very, very carefully because they didn't want to leave anything to chance. They were, and they wanted some explosive, actually, that no pun was intended there, some explosive things like the hangman's gallows and the bomb. And do you think that they knew they were going to lie about Kamala, or was that an afterthought when they found out she showed up at the DNC headquarters, and that's where one of the bombs were? I mean, the kitchen timer 1 hour bomb, that was so weird. That was left there. So now she shows up. Was that even on her schedule?
That was probably on her schedule, but I don't think do not think that let's say the conspirators expected her to be there. And that caused some problems for them because now they got to shut her up. She learned very quickly, this is not something I'm going to talk about. let's think about this, Elizabeth. She could have been saying from day one, I was within 20 feet of an assassination attempt by these mad bombers, right? She hasn't mentioned that being there to this day. Not to
I
this.
wondered about that once. She was talking about something, and I thought, wait a minute, you were at the DNC, and why aren't you talking about this? Because that would be a normal thing to do.
Sure. You'd be saying, because especially after Trump was shot, she could say, I sympathize because I was nearly assassinated myself on January 6th when I came within 20 feet of a bomb that the FBI is still calling volatile or, viable. But what instead she did, she kept her mouth shut. So for a year, the judges and prosecutors were ratcheting up these charges on the John J. Sixers. It wasn't until November 2021 that finally Politico broke the story that, she really wasn't at the Capitol, right? And it wasn't until a year later, a month later, on the first anniversary, that Politico revealed where she was, which was at the DNC. So then they have to go back and amend all these filings to take out the fact that Kamala was not at the Capitol during the riot. It sounds funny, but they
Well,
were
does
ruining lives.
what are the implications here to history, to the story of this insurrection, to Donald Trump? The fact that they have changed the details and the facts, the fact that they had to remove them from filings, that she actually lied. I mean, do you have all of the footage of Kamala lying about where she was on the
Yeah,
day?
yeah. I have the video of her talking to Jane Pauley. It's up online. They don't even know how dangerous that is to their cause yet. And she could say, "Well, I didn't lie. I just didn't mention that I was at the DNC when the bomb was found
When a
there."
bomb was there. I've seen the videos of the SUV. I believe it was a black SUV, was in the driveway, and you can see where the park bench is, and that's where this kitchen timer bomb was. When we see the Secret Service around that vehicle, do we ever see Kamala getting in or out of the vehicle in any of those videos that they've allowed us to see?
No, I think they probably do the loading and unloading underground
Oh,
in
I
the in
see.
the. But what we do see, and this is hats off here to Darren Beattie of Revolver News and Julie Kelly because they're doing
Yes.
a lot of the legwork, is that we now have a video taken a few minutes before 1 o'clock, and this is, I think, will prove very telling, of a Capitol police officer. No, I'm sorry, was it Capitol Police? No, it was a Metropolitan Police officer who was on, that's the Washington, D.C. police, getting stops his SUV just outside of the view of that bench with a bag, walks over in the direction of the bench, which we never get to see on the surveillance video. And then he walks back a minute or two later, right? I think the bomb was planted then. Just a little before. I
So
think the
what
whole
is
thing
that
about,
footage? Because I remember this all coming out, and I was trying to piece, again, be an expert on
yeah,
everything at
yeah,
all
right.
times. Right?
That just came out within the last week or so.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. And so, well, let me go back to Kamala, because this
sure.
is all about Kamala, as
Election. Yeah,
President
right.
Trump would say.
Right.
Um, do you know how many times I had to say the word Kamala to try to pronounce her name correctly, just for the record? This is about Kamala because we are faced with, well, okay, I'll give my personal opinion. I believe that if we had free and fair elections, that if the federal agencies were not handing forms out to register to vote to without asking if they are legally citizens and able to vote, if there weren't so many actions being taken intended to allow for some form of election fraud. If that was all buttoned down and it was impossible to accomplish, especially with the illegal aliens voting. I believe Trump would win in a landslide that would make every other landslide look like, little waves lapping up on a seashore. And but I don't think that I don't know that we have a handle on things. I think a lot more has been done than I originally thought. 6 months ago, a year ago, I was thinking the Republicans have lost their mind because they're going right into this as if 2020 never happened.
No, yeah, I think they're better, much better prepared this
Much
time.
better prepared. I've heard of, and I'm going to be doing a lot of interviews on this. But if we go into this election, I believe that Donald Trump would win if it was free and fair. But if it is not free and fair, or maybe I'm just wrong, there's so many more people that want Kamala and Tampon Tim, to be the president and vice president of the United States, that they win. What are we faced with? So you've written this book and you've detailed the lives and the events of these, was it 10 women, Ashley and 9 others? Yeah.
Yeah, actually, two dead,
And
eight. Yeah.
and what will our lives look like with the weaponized DOJ, with the weaponized FBI, with them having gotten away scot-free, with no one having to pay the price, even the mainstream media, the regime media, the corporate media, whatever we call it, the legacy media, no one has paid a price for the, I would say, catastrophic attack on our First Amendment freedoms, on the narrative of what happened January 6th. It has put a whole host of people, including our president, to shame in the eyes and hearts and minds of many, many Americans. I don't know about overseas, doesn't matter. But many Americans think of President Trump, and many of us who are part of desiring to make America great again, we are like pariahs to some. Now, there's a
Oh,
lot
yeah.
of people waking up, but what
Yeah.
kind of entree does this give Kamala and Tim and all of those who will be left in place moving forward 4 years?
If they win in 2024 as they did in 2020, uh, we've got problems on our hands. I mean, I think we're projecting a world that if you and I talk about it here, we'll get in trouble for even talking about it. But a lot of people won't take this lying down.
Well, let me
But
say this. I don't care about YouTube, so it's not going to be, this is going to Rumble, it's going to X. It'll probably end up on Facebook and YouTube, but I don't care if it gets taken down and, whatever. So you can say whatever you want to because it's going onto friendly platforms. Just
yeah, and I wouldn't
FYI.
say that, but we know there's people out there uh, who if they thought the election was stolen, and as it was in 2020, the way it was, uh, who will not just bring flagpoles to an insurrection. It won't happen on January 6th. It won't happen at the Capitol. It'll be different. It won't be pretty, and it won't be a happy state for America. I'm an optimist, though. I think Trump's going to win.
Can you tell me what you think President Trump would do upon coming into office and not only addressing the injustice, the gross injustice that these poor people have experienced, and you can elaborate on maybe, being imprisoned without bail and some of those things if you would like, but also to prevent this kind of injustice again, because we can't leave it with the whim of who's ever in office. And I'm not sure if Congress and the president can put into place, unless it's all already there and they've just, of course, Biden is ignored and Harris is ignored, compared to what the Harris-Walz administration will do. Can you put it simply and starkly, compare those
Sure,
two things?
sure. Uh, Elizabeth, here's what I would like to see happen if presuming, and I believe they will, Trump and Vance prevail in November. And that is a recognition, first off, that you're never going to get justice in Washington, D.C.
Mm.
So that no political Democrat will ever be convicted. No political Republican will ever be acquitted. Trump got 5% of the vote in D.C. in 2020, his best year. He didn't do that well in 2016. So here's what I would recommend. I would recommend a South Africa style Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So what they set up was this commission in which if you told the truth about what you had done, they would grant you amnesty.
Mm.
So I'm more interested right now in truth than in actual real justice. And the justice will come in that these people will be forever known for the infamous deeds they've done. And there's so many of them, they'd have to take a number, be a queue outside the door.
Mm-hmm.
And I should also believe that Trump should pardon all nonviolent protesters that day. And he would pardon for everyone who did nothing violent, who just did nothing more than protest in or around that building. That's what should happen in a Trump administration. I would also recommend that going forward, we move the federal district courthouses out of Washington, D.C.
I was just going to say the same thing.
There's no justice possible there, right?
Where would you move them, Jack?
I would move them to someplace where essentially, you can move them to New York City. That wouldn't make any difference. So,
No.
I would move them to someplace if you wanted to be close in the middle of Virginia, in a county where the vote splits 50-50 on a normal year, some purple county somewhere.
Right.
And set it up again so you'd have the chance of getting a jury that was fair. You're not going to get that in Washington in the foreseeable future.
Have you heard Trump or Vance speak about this? Because those are the kinds of reforms I was thinking too. Well, I didn't think of the Truth and Reconciliation, but moving those courts out of Washington, D.C. is such a natural.
Yeah. And I don't know, who has to approve that or what the congressional process is, but it doesn't seem like it would be that. It's not constitutionally forbidden or anything, it would be hard to, because I believe when the Constitution was written, there was no District of Columbia. So that is what Trump victory would look like.
What about the DOJ? Do you believe that there's anything that can be done about the FBI? Well, I guess cleaning house, but is there something that could be done to prevent any other aspect of it with regard to the DOJ and the FBI?
The FBI, I think, is salvageable. A lot of people don't. I believe it is. I believe, obviously the rot at the top is pretty pervasive, and they've had, they've really had since the Obama election to let that kind of rot fester. So there'd be a lot of cleaning. I mean, we're talking a couple levels at the top. And again, with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, we could say to these people, hey, you want to wait around? We can find the crime. We'll go after if you want, but it may be time for you to resign and
Is
get
there
out.
recourse currently, because I don't believe that there is, for someone who has experienced malicious prosecution by the Department of Justice or a very clear example of overreach by the FBI down to the agents?
I don't know I don't know the law on that, whether they have
Either.
immunity or not. And boy, the list would be so long. It would be nice if they could have like this collective fund,
Mm-hmm.
where they, where you wouldn't have to have individual lawsuits going forward, but rather a
Like a
collective.
class action.
Yeah, right, exactly. And set aside a fund, like a super fund or something,
That's a good
where
idea.
people who had
I'll
grievances.
talk to President Trump about that. Okay, so take me to Kamala and Tim. I'm sure you've been studying Tim Walz' dealings in Minnesota and elsewhere. What do you think these two persons would get up to upon taking office with regard to things like going after weaponization of DOJ, FBI, going after political dissenters, free speech?
And I'll give you an example for each of them. When she was Attorney General, Kamala Harris had David Daleiden arrested, stormed his house. Daleiden and his partner, Sandra Merritt, did this extraordinary investigative work, and they documented that these Planned Parenthood clinics across the country were selling baby parts. I mean, you can call it fetal tissue if you want, but
No.
if you watch those videos, you see there are people sort of blithely going through a tray of body parts saying, oh, here's an arm. That fetches the X amount of dollars. There's a leg. There's a lot for the man. I mean, it's gross, grotesque. And when Hillary Clinton saw these videos when they came out in 2015, even she was disturbed. Then they realized the way to solve this political problem is the way they usually do, and that is to enlist the media. So what the Washington Post did, this is an incredible story. I don't think anyone's ever told it, is that Fusion GPS is the outfit that gave us the Steele dossier, right? So they went through Daleiden's videos and said, oh, they're edited. Well, yeah, said Daleiden. I turned them off when I went to the restroom. There was no trick editing. This is transparently grotesque, what we were watching. Multiple examples, multiple states. And then California, under Kamala Harris, they decided that it was a crime to do what he did, right? So, and he said they argued that these conversations were taped in public spaces, so that's not breaching, your two-party consent rule. And as of this date, his trial in San Francisco is still pending. So, and we're talking for actions that took place 9 years ago. So they've totally tied him up in court. And he may end up in prison too, like so many other pro-lifers. And I say this to my pro-life friends with great respect. We have one battle ahead of us. That's the win in November.
Right.
But everything else is aside for now. We'll get back to the life issues once we've reestablished the rule of law. That is what I would like to see happen in Trump world. But if Trump doesn't prevail, then we have the Kamala Walz world. We know about Kamala. She's happy to imprison investigative reporters for doing their job.
When it's clearly an illegitimate prosecution.
Yeah, except in California where nothing's illegitimate. And that's where you need the rule of law. I mean, otherwise, everything you do is in vain.
So it's a rule of men, not law. And so
right.
Men, just as in any tyranny or authoritarian government, what have you, they can make up the law as they go. Kind of like Brazil right now. And X.
Or in Kamala's case, the rule of women. Well, let's give her her fair due. In Walz's case, it's kind of interesting what he did in Minneapolis. And I think the probably most disturbing thing he did going forward, the most Orwellian thing, was to set up these snitch hotlines so you could rat at your neighbor if they weren't wearing their mask outside.
Or had Thanksgiving with family coming over, pulling up with the apple and pumpkin pie and going up to the door and call in on your neighbor, or maybe your mother sends out an invitation and you turn your mom in because God forbid she should get off scot-free.
That happened on January 6th. I was talking to one woman whose son called in her husband, right? 17-year-old son ratted out her husband, his father. And the guy's serving like 4 years in prison now, even though he didn't even go in the building. And you can imagine what those Thanksgiving dinners are like.
So imagine for persons unknown, whatever, who are watching this and they've, it's hard to imagine they've heard nothing, but this story has been silenced. It's only in a niche realm where you're getting the details. And if they're hearing that for the first time, here's a man who went to Washington, D.C. He never entered the Capitol building. His 17-year-old son, who's got no doubt some teenage angst, he's on his high horse, in his ivory tower, like most teenagers are. They're self-righteous. And he calls in his dad, which may be something he regrets the rest of his life.
I'm sure he will.
So
Yeah.
he snitches on his dad. His dad is, in essence, put in prison because his son is, annoyed that he got, you know, had his phone taken away once or put on
Something.
restriction or something, whatever. You can build any scenario around it. The point is the man never even went into the Capitol building, and now he's serving a 4-year term. We started with Obama, but it seems to me with Biden Harris, it's escalated. And now if she and Walz go in, it seems to me that we could see even greater outrages.
The ultimate process ends like in the Soviet Union where I forget the kid's name, but he was a national hero in the Soviet Union. There were statues of him because what he did is when his parents' farm was being collectivized and during the Great Famine, they had the ear law. I think if you could be executed for secreting away as much as little as 1 ear of corn. He called in his parents, right? Because they were hiding some of their harvest so they wouldn't starve to death. And the parents were promptly either executed or deported to the furthest reaches of Russia. And the kid was, I think the townspeople turned on the kid and killed him. And he became, they have statues of him, right? All little Soviets would learn about his heroic deeds, ratting out his parents. We're just one step away from that now, right?
Yes. I just saw on X a minute ago that in Ireland, a Christian teacher, my heritage is Irish, Swedish, and a lot of Irish in there. They just arrested a male Christian school teacher because he would not affirm the radical LGBT agenda or
Yeah.
whatever.
Video. Yeah.
Then what did they do? They're actually their social services are indoctrinating their staff, and they're pushing for adoption to be limited to only those who are LGBTQ, LMNOP, or who actively affirm I guess, in writing their affirmation of that radical ideology.
You
And
know,
I just
Ireland,
reposted Coming to
uh,
America, right?
right. I lived in Ireland 30 years ago, and watching the complete collapse of that culture is in lightning speed is astonishing and a good cautionary tale because you see where it goes. First, they're being liberal and open-minded, and let's get rid of divorce laws, let's get rid of the abortion laws, let's welcome in foreigners. Our culture is gone. So what do we put in its place? We put in Soviet style isms. We have all the isms that we're importing from America and the EU, and we fill that cultural void with all this nonsense, and it leads to just what you're talking about: people being imprisoned for saying the obvious, right?
Well,
For saying the 2+2=4,
you
right?
you can't you can't rip out the heart. Let's just use a real body. If you removed my heart, I would be dead unless you replaced it with a different heart, whether it's mechanical or, from a donor. The point is, you can't leave the void there. And in the heart of our nation is the rule of law. It is the Constitution. It's the principles of our founding and the Declaration. And you could go on and on and on. Freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and you could really go. We're guaranteed a a republic, not a democracy. But when you have dumbed down your students, that's why I am somewhat helpful, because they've destroyed at least one generation, if not two or three, but especially one generation by dumbing them down and and essentially, in a way, almost universally prohibiting them from understanding their nation. And if they did, they would love their nation so much, because if you compare it to any
Yeah.
other nation, we have the freedoms that are now falling, and they should love America for good reason. But what I also think is, in one generation, we could reclaim it if we were
Yeah,
able to
Elizabeth,
do.
you're absolutely right. Because what we have is a foundational civic religion that
Mhm.
is based on, documents that are 250 years old and still going strong. We also have as an advantage, have had from the beginning, from day one, a multi-ethnic society. So we weren't an ethnic culture. And people say, oh, we're all white guys. No, well, they're the Dutch. They got their butts kicked by the British and the French. They got their
Doesn't
butts
matter if they're
kicked.
white, they're Dutch, and the
Right.
other guys are German. And
They had different languages, different religions, and our civic code encapsulated them all. So the idea that America is more diverse now than ever is nonsense. A century ago, we were much more diverse, literally.
they're just
We had,
noticing skin color. Who
that's
cares
right.
if
Right.
Hispanics have, or Indians from south of the border have darker skin? That's not the point. But the
Right.
point is that this civic religion that you're speaking of is what has been stolen. And I call that my birthright. So the
Right.
moment that I was born in a constitutional republic, that was my property. And
Right.
no one can take that away from me legally unless it is overturned by an amendment to that constitution. So they cannot steal my constitutional republic. Well, I mean, they cannot remove it from me
No.
unless they do it legally. And what I see is there's an attempt to do that. One, I think that when you bring in tens and tens of millions of people who, it's not a writing test. They can't write English, but they can't even understand English, and they want to immediately have them vote. I mean,
Yeah.
people who study the candidates and have lived here for 20 years struggle sometimes with the issues. And yet
Right.
somebody comes from Guatemala, can't speak or read English. Biden, he could, he'd take his piece of paper, check off Biden, or Harris, rather,
Yeah.
in this case. So that's a big problem, bringing in, like, saturating or diluting your own civic culture, civic
Right.
religion, as you're calling it, and replacing it with people who cannot possibly legitimately vote. They should not vote in our republic. And then, of course, the education. But also, I read two articles recently. One is a couple of years old in the New York Times, where they're talking about the Constitution is the problem,
Uh-huh.
and that we have to essentially make, this is the first time I've ever heard this, Jack. This will blow your mind. But just go to the New York Times, search Constitution, and two of the first things that come up will be the articles I'm talking about. They're talking about just trashing it and throwing it away. And the First Amendment's too dangerous. It's gone too far. But this one proposal is that they take the District of Columbia, a little tiny city, you would think, and make it a state.
Right.
They want to make it more than one state. Yeah, read the New York Times, then click on the link, and that's what they take you to. From Harvard, that's the proposal from Harvard.
Yeah. It's
Excuse me.
any proposal from Harvard is suspect
Yeah,
now.
that's exactly.
Plagiarized. There's an excellent chance it's been plagiarized by who's ever writing it. I can name Harvard people who got busted for plagiarism, including their former president, Claudine Gay, and even their alumni like Doris Kearns Goodwin and Lawrence Stride and Charles Ogletree. The list goes on. Barack Obama. So
Well, the problem is that we've got the regime, and if Americans, and this is what, tell me if you agree with this. When I watched Charlie Kirk, and he's brilliant, I love the guy. He's a kid to you and me, and I watched Charlie, but he's accomplished so much with Turning Point,
yeah,
and he repeatedly pounds in this truth that he proclaims, that it's not about convincing really the unconvincible. It's too late anyway.
Right.
It's almost impossible for anybody who's leftist. I mean, that takes years for them,
Here.
and you can't force that, right? But it's about registering new voters. Go
Right.
because it's crazy to you and me, but Christians, tens of millions of Christians are not registered. Tens of
Yeah.
million conservatives, tens of millions of MAGA people are not
Hundred.
registered. And then my suggestion, which I've added to it, is everybody, because everybody gets lazy, Tuesday, I don't feel like getting up or going outside in the rain or whatever. Grab an accountability partner and
Right.
say, you're going to force me and I'm going to force you. We're going to go together or we're going to call each other and get our butts out of the house. But also, if you can, register as many new, not just yourself, get yourself registered if you're not, but register as many new voters as possible. And so he's putting that campaign together. I'm hoping that I can get him on soon for this series, Kamala's America. What do you think? Do you think that that's a smart
Yeah.
strategy?
The I love the work they're doing in Pennsylvania. Is it Scott Pressler? Is that his name?
Oh, Scott Pressler. I'm not
Yeah.
sure if that's who's doing it, but yeah, I know Scott Pressler.
They're turning county on one county after another just through sheer evangelism. Uh, I believe that's is now, and I could be wrong. I should know it. The I would say too is the you have to reduce the stakes to something they can understand. And I was I just give you an example. In 2012, I go to a traditional Latin Catholic church, and the beauty of that not only is in terms of the spiritual part, but you'll never see an Obama bumper sticker, a Hillary bumper sticker, a
The
Bush.
FBI, you may see the FBI there.
Now, what we do is we frisk each other when we come in. It's teasing. Uh, in 2012, our priest was giving a sermon from the pulpit, and he raised this question, kind of rhetorical question. He goes, I've been asked is if it's okay for a Catholic to vote for a Mormon, right? This is Mitt Romney they were talking about.
Right.
And he said, under normal circumstances, I would advise against it. But when that Mormon is running against the Archbishop of Satan, yes, that was his phrase, Archbishop of Satan. I just almost laughed out loud. I love that, Archbishop of Satan. So the question now is, you go to your friends and saying, yeah, you may not like Trump, you may not like this or that, but he's running against the new Archbishop of Satan.
That's right.
And that's not Kupik, Archbishop Kupik, who seemed to be auditioning for that role when he was in Chicago. No, it's Kamala Harris, newly installed Archbishop of Satan. And if we continue to fight among ourselves, if we don't get registered, come election day, you're going to be able to hear her cackles down to the ninth circle of hell. So get out.
Cackler in chief. That
Right.
that is very true. So for Catholics, which I'm not, I actually was. My mother says you were born Catholic, so you're always a Catholic. But
Right.
so she's Catholic still. Joseph was born Catholic too. But anyway, I keep Shabbat on Saturday. It's Friday night. So, and as well does my mother. But what you're saying is with Catholics, one of the low hanging fruit of the discussion that you can have with your friends and well, just in your congregation is, look, there's a choice here. This is like Nero.
Right.
Kamala Harris is like Nero, if you will.
Right.
And then there's somebody who, okay, mean tweets.
Yeah. Right.
And I took to task a pastor who's like a Calvinist pastor in 2020 in a video and saying, because he put out a column saying he can't vote for President Trump because of his mean tweets. And he explains that, maybe he can't vote for Biden, but he can't vote for Trump because he equated essentially abortion and mean tweets.
Yeah. That's where they're at. Right.
Yeah. But
And
I
so,
think that what you're saying is speak to the person where they are and what is simplest and most profound because you got to get your message to hit home. And for a Catholic, that might be kind of the question that was posed to your priest years
Right.
ago.
Right. Okay. Trump is our Mormon this year. He's imperfect. He's not what we would see as our
Yeah.
savior of our souls, but he can save the rule of law. And that's the thing that is uh, forefront in the campaign this year. The right to life hinges on the rule of law. The right to every other thing hinges on the rule of
It
law.
all hinges on the rule of law. And I would say also the First Amendment or freedom of speech. I know that I'm carving out something because you need the whole thing.
Right.
The Declaration, the Constitution, and the amendments, the Bill of, well, you don't need the 13th Amendment, income tax. But anyway, I think that if you remove the rule of law, which is probably the chief sin of all of these leftist candidates, all leftists despise the rule of law. That goes first. But you can't have, because the Constitution is law. If you
Right.
eliminate the rule of law, you've literally eliminated the Bill of Rights, you've eliminated the Constitution. You can even get rid of the Declaration of Independence, probably. And like
Why
they
not?
said, Kamala's chief first act, she didn't mention it in this interview on CNN, but would be to start working on overturning a filibuster so that she
Right.
can just wipe everything out.
And then packing the Supreme Court so they could, take care of that inconvenience.
Yeah, an inconvenient, an inconvenient barrier to tyranny. Well, Jack, you have been so gracious to spend this time with me. I do invite you to come back and talk more in depth about your book, which I recommend to everybody that you get it because you're going to get an insight into January 6th from a very, very unique perspective. The untold story of 10 women. And of course, first and foremost, Ashley Babbitt, who is a martyr. And so obviously you can get that at Amazon. Tell us your credentials, like where do we go to you on X or anywhere else?
On X, I'm just at Jack Cashill. I have a website, cashill.com. If you're really curious, that website will take you to my email account. Um, and
Great.
I know Facebook, but until they're always shadow banning me or banning me or something. Facebook is, other than keeping in touch with your friends and neighbors, useless. And I post my Wordle scores on Facebook.
I know my mother literally, when I was teaching her how to use X, she says, I'm not even going to Facebook anymore because all they
Yeah,
do is they send me this, whatever. And now
right.
she's on Twitter like a mad woman. I mean, X, like a mad woman.
Excellent.
So we'll get you at Jack Cashill on X. And I look forward to having you again, my friend. We've known each other for many, many years, and we
Yeah.
so appreciate it. And you're one of the top columnists at WorldNet Daily for the last 20 plus years. So
No,
thank you, my friend.
I always appreciate